Welcome to One Line Brainwaves. I'm Brandon Staglin, your host. Today's topic is the aging brain. What is cognitive decline? Who is at risk? And can we predict who might be about to develop the disease? Also, are there ways to prevent it? In just a few minutes, we're going to talk with two experts on age-related cognitive decline, Alzheimer's and dementia. One is a researcher at University of California at San Francisco, and another is an amazing advocate who took care of her husband as well as her mother for many years, who lived with Alzheimer's disease in her family. We'll also have singer-songwriter Ketch Secor, the co-founder of the Old Crow Medicine Show, a very popular band, who will perform a poignant song about aging and enduring love. But first, a little anecdote about age-related cognitive decline and how I believe it. There may be some ways to stave it off. So my grandmother, Darlene Staglin, was a firecracker. In fact, we called her the Energizer Bunny. And she lived to just a month shy of her 90th birthday. She passed away in 2012. And all throughout her entire life, she was sharp as a whip. And she always wanted to be in the middle of things, very social, very positive, and she had a very strong faith in God. And she'd go to church every single Sunday, right up until the last few months of her life when she couldn't anymore. But I think all these factors of being social, having a positive outlook may have been protective for her and for her brain health as she grew older. I don't know. We'll learn from our experts later if that could be the case, and I'm curious to know. So we'll go into that in just a minute. Let me just say one last thing about my grandmother. Right until the end of her life, every morning she prayed to God in the morning that she was so thankful that she had lived close to her family and that she could still walk with a walker even though she couldn't walk without one. And even though she couldn't see out of one eye, she could still see out of her other eye, even though a stroke had taken division in one of her eyes. And she was thankful and happy for that all throughout her life. So she's an inspiration to me, and I hope that I will have brain health like she did throughout her life. Joining us now is singer-songwriter Ketch Secor of Old Crow Medicine Show. Ketch, we're so honored to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Brainwaves.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me. I'm coming in from Nashville, Tennessee.
Fantastic. How you doing there in Nashville today?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. I'm keeping my spirits up because I got this thing strapped around me, and you just can't get too weighed down by one of these. They're a little bit balloon-like.
Yeah, an emotional musical balloon. That's fantastic. I'd love to see that. Well, that's great. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing your spirit with us today. So 2020 has been a year of upheaval for everyone, especially for those in the music industry. But it's also been a time for reflection. Tell us how you've been writing some songs this year about the events of 2020, and how has 2020 changed you and your work?
Well, thanks for asking. It has been a really challenging year for people in my business. And I know people around the country, around the world, have really had to change the ways that they do business. As a performer, it's not just to change my methods. I've had to basically sidetrack my work because I'm in the live music business, and that's how I make money and pay my bills, and also how I fill up my heart. But of course, who knows when that's going to get back to work again. It could be as much as 2 touring years will pass. And that could spell disaster financially for a lot of the folks in my line of work. So it's certainly a grievous time, and there's a real scramble afoot for performers like me to try and figure out other ways to make a living. It's also hard to figure out your sort of relevance as a musician in these strange times. But for me, I've got the fortune of having, a 20-year career in the music business, and so I'm less concerned about losing ground through the lack of me showing up in your town to put on a hot show. It's not like I'm on the radio or anything, so I'm not making any bread off that. But the time apart from touring has been a really welcome change. I've really enjoyed getting off of the tour bus, and this is the longest that I've stood in one town and not gone anywhere since I was probably 17 years old, and that's like more than 20 years ago. It's actually 25. It's really been great to just be firmly planted. I live in a town with lots of things to get excited about, and sometimes I just sit on the porch and listen. I've also been writing a bunch of new music that feels pertinent and topical, and I'm just trying to take it easy and as it comes, and remain optimistic and positive, and share that positivity with others around me.
That's great. What a great spirit you have. And reminds me of another artist we had on Brainwaves a few months ago. His name is Peter Meyer, but he wrote a song called "Where Is the Light?" It's all about how in the dark of December, everything is dark all the time when you go, and then, but where's the light? And then the chorus ends, "The light's inside of me." I think you have that inside of you too.
Well, Peter's definitely right, and I give it to songwriters to have that sense about how to make sense of the world in times of darkness. This is always it's the dark before the light. It's the rain that gives way to the parting of the clouds, and there are just so many reasons to be hopeful in times like this. Lately, I've been thinking, oh, this is the end of the old paradigm, and we're going to remake the world anew on the other end of this. Spirit like that, positive thinking like that, I think could be a real game change for our society in the ways that we know one another, love and support, and lift up each other.
Mm-hmm. Very much needed to hear that right now. Thank you. It sounds like you draw inspiration from the world around you, both the dark and the light. Can you tell us a bit about your process for writing and where you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, well, I love writing music, and my inspiration comes from all the sounds that I hear. I did a lot of critical listening as a kid, and a lot of the music that I listened to was either really traditional or parts of a really deep body of American song. So having been immersed in some very primary sounds of American popular music has meant that my expressions tend to be reflections of some of the earlier recorded sounds, and love of folk music brought that out in me. But the other day I was painting at my friend's house, and we were listening to Lady Gaga, and I thought that sounded great too, and it reminded me of all this pop music. And after that, we listened to the George Michael album Faith. And then we listened to Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual. So I see a continuum and a lot of thematic torch passing that happens with popular music. And, I'm always proud to be somebody that passes the torch. The person that I revere, maybe more than anyone else, is Pete Seeger. And Pete often talked about writing new music as forging a link in a chain. And one of the things that gives me great hope is knowing that what Pete says is true, that chain is both past and present simultaneously. It's also, however, the future. We're all connected through these songs, through the spirit of singing, through the force that makes somebody want to sing and makes somebody need to hear something be sung.
Wow, that is profound. It makes me think of how when I listen to music that is both old and more recent, and I haven't listened to it in a while, and now that I'm older, I get more out of it. Like it's something, I feel like I have a connection, like a link in that chain with the songwriters who come before, something I get value out of that I can then pass on through my own work with one mind and so forth. But it inspires me, like I think as you're saying. So your work is definitely important in that regard. Earlier this year we lost one of those links in the chain, the musical giant, the legendary John Prine. You said his music has the power to lift us all up. What is it about his songs and about music in general, and I think you've gone over this a bit now, but what is it about music and John Prine's songs that is so therapeutic?
Well, John was just an angel among us, and I think that the intersection of my life with his is something that I'll always treasure, and something I'll tell my kids about when they're old enough to understand more deeply. They understand now that he's dead, and they know that he died in the global pandemic that they're living through as 6 and 9-year-olds. But they don't know the measurement of what's been lost. They just know that somebody that Dad cared about is gone. Like right now I'm thinking about my friend Justin Earl. He died on Sunday. And Justin and me and a whole bunch of other young cats about 35 to 45 years old, we grew up, listening to John Prine and thinking that John was, one of the most important, teachers that a student like me can have. Well, I was so. It was such a blessing that as a student of John Prine's, that I would turn about 30 years old and become an apprentice. I went and did, a dozen concerts with John. I got to talk with him and sing with him and perform with him in stages in far-flung places. I got to ask him about his childhood, about his brother, who was so important to him, about growing up in Chicago, about joining the Army, about delivering the mail, and just being around him. He had a beautiful way of reflecting the kind of personality that's in his music, this kind of disposition of taking it as it comes. I remember watching him at this soul food kitchen in Nashville called the Silver Sands. He was always at the place where the meatloaf was. He liked good food, and he ate it slowly. But standing in the Silver Sands restaurant, it was so much like being inside a John Prine song. There was like the flies buzzing around where the cook had her hairnet on, and every time the bell jingled above the door, it was like a new character was entering a John Prine song. Somebody beautiful and tragic, somebody who was disfigured, and yet so graceful with such poise, despite their afflictions. A real humanist, John Prine was.
You have the same empathy that John Prine is known for. I mean, seeing that in him and feeling that from him, and I think you also, having that empathy, that feeling for him, you got a sense of, when you were there with him, where that all came from, by seeing what he was immersed in his life like that. And what a gift that was for you. And now I can't wait for you to pass some of that gift along to us today. Hello in There is a song filled with John Prine's characteristic empathy and humanity and honesty. And you're going to perform it for us today. Will you please perform Hello in There for us?
I sure will. Before I do, my heart's heavy with the loss of my friend Justin Towns Earl, so I'd like to sing this one for him. We had an apartment in the city. Me and Loretta liked living there. It's been years since the kids have grown a life of their own, left us alone. John and Lynn Linda lived in Omaha. Joe is somewhere on the road. We lost Davy in the Korean War. I still don't know what for. It don't matter anymore. You know, the trees just grow stronger, and old rivers grow wilder every day. Old people just grow lonesome, waiting for someone to say hello in there. Me and Loretta, we don't talk much more. Sits and stares through the back door screen, and all the news just repeats itself like some forgotten dream. Yeah, we both see. Someday I'll go and call up Rudy. Work together down at the factory. What could I say? He asks what's new. Nothing, what's with you? Nothing much to do. And all that old trees just grow stronger, and old rivers grow wilder every day. Old people just grow lonesome, waiting for someone to say hello in there. So if you're walking down the street sometime, spot some hollow ancient eyes, please don't just pass them by and stare as if you didn't care. Say hello in there. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ketch. That was so powerfully moving, that song. Thank you for sharing that with us and our viewers. Here now to discuss the science behind how the brain ages are Dr. Kaitlin Casaletto, who's a neuropsychologist at the University of California, San Francisco Memory and Aging Center. Kaitlin, thanks for being with us on Brainwaves today.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely. Also, Dr. Meryl Comer, co-founder of Us Against Alzheimer's and author of Slow Dancing with a Stranger, Lost and Found at the Age of Alzheimer's, which details her experiences as primary caregiver for her husband Harvey over many years, who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at age 58. Please feel free to post your questions for our guests at any time. Kaitlin and Meryl, thanks so much for being here. So Kaitlin.
Brandon, just let me make one correction. I'm not a doctor. I'll leave that to Kaitlin. I am a noisy advocate.
A noisy advocate. Oh, that's right. And you're also the chair of the Global Alliance for Women's Brain Health.
That's right.
Extremely impressive, and thank you for the amazing work you do there. So, Kaitlin, let me start with you. How are you doing there in San Francisco these days?
Yeah, San Francisco's holding up. I think we've been taking a pretty conservative approach. I'm in the city itself, and There's been some ups and downs, but I think we're making our way through it.
Okay, great. I hope university life is still, you can still do your research even during the pandemic there at the university. So in your research, have you found what have you found about how the brain ages? And are there differences between healthy brain aging and maybe abnormal brain aging that you found?
Yeah, so my research broadly, I try to understand resilience in brain aging, and that's really my area of expertise. So there's sort of two ways that we do that. One is by sort of identifying individuals who age really well in terms of their brain. And these are people like your grandmother that you just talked about. And we try and figure out what's their secret sauce that keeps them going. The other way that we do this in my program of research is by identifying behaviors that we know are protective for the brain as we get older. So things like exercise or cognitive stimulation. And I try to determine what's the biology that links those behaviors to brain health. And the idea would be that if we can figure out these resilience factors that your grandmother seemed to have, these could be treatments for cognitive aging or for all types of neurodegenerative disease. So that's really my area of focus. And in order to understand those types of trajectories, we first need to understand what is normal as the brain gets older. And there's been a lot of data on that. So what we see, if you look at a group level of people's thinking skills across age as they develop, we see that there's sort of these rapid gains in thinking skills like memory and language, attention in childhood. They seem to peak in the 30s, kind of mid 30s. But then we do see this group level decline in these thinking skills with increasing age. And that's part of the normal developmental trajectory of the brain. So you might notice things as you get older. I think the most common complaints we hear are just kind of slowed thinking, a little bit more effortful, trying to pull up that word that you're thinking about or recall that memory you're trying to pull out. And those are really common complaints that we have as we get older, kind of considered within the normative range. And then that's much different than the abnormal trajectory. So this is a trajectory where as someone gets older, they take a much steeper decline in their thinking skills. So steeper meaning, within 6 months, a year, a couple of years, you see a much steeper jump in their thinking skills. And often it can occur just in one isolated thinking area. So just in memory or maybe just in language. And that's when we would start to be concerned about an abnormal or an atypical brain aging trajectory. So something like if it was in memory, not remembering a conversation from 10 minutes ago, or getting lost in one's neighborhood or a really familiar place, that we would expect that to be maintained as we get older. And so that's when we start to get concerned and try and think about what's going on in those abnormal trajectories.
Yeah, that's well, I'm glad to hear that some of the things that I've experienced in terms of like slow to remember things as I'm getting a little bit older, maybe common. Thanks for going over some of those points about what to look for as warning signs of potential oncoming dementia or Alzheimer's. And then you mentioned that you look at resilience in your research and how to promote that. How do you determine who might have a predisposition to neurodegenerative health conditions? And are Alzheimer's and dementia the same? And is there a genetic link that you can see?
Yeah, these are great questions. And maybe I'll tackle that question around, what is Alzheimer's versus dementia? This is one of the most common questions that we get in the clinic and when we present to communities. So what dementia means is you can think of it as an umbrella term, an overarching term. Dementia means that someone has a problem in their thinking and it affects their everyday life. What Alzheimer's disease is the cause of that dementia. So you can have dementia due to Alzheimer's disease or dementia due to cerebrovascular disease. It's sort of like having pain in your hand. It's just a symptom, but we don't know what's causing it. It could be due to carpal tunnel syndrome, or it could be due to arthritis. So dementia is the big term, Alzheimer's is the cause. And yeah, how do we determine who's has a predisposition? This is an active area of research. This is exactly what we want to try and figure out. I think more and more we're moving towards this precision, personalized health to figure out why in some people they might be at a greater risk for dementia or for Alzheimer's disease specifically. In terms of genetic links, what we know so far, and I'll speak, maybe just to Alzheimer's disease for now. So there are some forms of Alzheimer's disease that are called autosomal dominant or familial Alzheimer's disease. And this is when there's one mutation in a gene that's passed on. And if you have that mutation, you will get Alzheimer's disease. It's sort of dominant. This is very uncommon. It's less than 1% of people who have Alzheimer's disease carry this genetic mutation. So not very common. More common is a genetic risk factor. And you may have heard of this gene. It's called the ApoE gene. And there's one allele, the E4 allele of the ApoE gene, that increases our risk for Alzheimer's disease. And this is the biggest genetic risk factor that we know of right now for Alzheimer's disease. So the E4 allele is present in about 14% of the population. And if you carry one of these E4 alleles, there's about a 3-fold increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. If you carry 2 of them, it's about a 10-fold increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. But I will say more and more, I think the field is moving towards this idea of polygenetic risk, meaning that there's many different types of genes that when they come together are expressed in a way that makes you more vulnerable to developing something like Alzheimer's disease when in combination with the right environmental risk. So this sort of polygenetic and poly-environmental piece that when they come together is a perfect storm for dementia. And I'll just add that this idea of predisposition and environmental risk, this is really where my research is focused. I think we're understanding now that the environment and our lifestyle might play a huge role in how our brains age and how we might be at risk for dementia. So there's estimates that 30 to up to 40% of dementia cases could be attributable to lifestyle and environmental factors. So when we're thinking about predisposition and precision health, we need to think about that person's genetic risk and also the types of environments and behaviors that they engage in that could put them at risk.
Wow, that's fascinating to think that there are things we could do in our lives that can mitigate or help to improve the chances of not getting, of not developing Alzheimer's or dementia in our lives. We'll go back into that a little bit. Thanks for going over all that with us. And Meryl, let's move over to you. So you lost your husband, Harvey, this past February. I'm sorry to hear that. For 24 years at home, you were his primary caregiver, also caring for your mother who lived with Alzheimer's as well. Describe your life before Harvey was diagnosed, and how did your relationship with him change as he became his primary caregiver?
Thank you, Brandon. Listening to Kaitlin, before my husband was diagnosed, and by the way, he was misdiagnosed 4 or 5 times because smart people hide out. He was chief of hematology oncology at the National Institute of Health and a specialist in von Willebrand's disease. So here you have a doctor. I was in media as a journalist in business sector. I was 48 years old. Go back 4 years. Alzheimer's, non-life illness was steeped in stigma, so no one talked about it. Harvey was also a 58-year-old man. It's the characteristic of early on in his brain. He was too smart, too young, too athletic. He did everything, and it just didn't matter. He was also only child, so there was no history for us to see whether or not it was familial. he was, as I said, misdiagnosed 4 or 5 times. As for our relationship, I thought I would read a short clip from my book, Slow Dancing with a Stranger, that I think captures it. Neither a scientist nor a neurologist, I've spent close to 2 decades trying to get inside my husband's head. How hard and unfair it is for such a smart man to lose pieces of his intellect and independence as the circuitry of his brain misfires and corrodes. No short-term memory sticks. His internal navigational compass is shut down. His disease is my crossword puzzle. He's long forgotten me, but I'm his co-pilot and guardian. I bear the burden of decisions for all of us, and the demons and terror of his world define mine. Any challenge is self-defeating. I play into his reality and pretend that our fate together is not doomed. Unfortunately, I know better. That sort of gives you an idea of what it was like. I was slow dancing not only with changes in behavior of my husband, but also around a disease that always kept us on edge and never knowing what comes next, not unlike, quite frankly, the coronavirus pandemic. We're very fragile. We don't know what we might be facing in this unknown. So going back to Kaitlin, your issue of resilience, I think this is a true test of resilience.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I can also just add that we see, patients who come in with early age of onset Alzheimer's disease, and it's so commonly misdiagnosed because of exactly what you're describing in your husband, these really high functioning, peak of their life, peak of their career folks. And it often gets misdiagnosed as, oh, that's just depression, or it's just a phase you're going through. And it really delays the types of, at least environmental interventions that we can really tackle to help improve quality of life. So I just want to validate that experience. We've seen many people come to us in that same situation.
Well, here I was, a journalist searching for answers, and even the doctors at the NIH were saying, well, maybe he's depressed, or another doctor was telling me to get off his back, being too focused that there might be something wrong. Pernicious anemia, or mad cow's disease, because he had just been in London for a medical conference. So they were really going back 24 years, their diagnostics were not sharp, and they really didn't want to label anyone. And labeling is so critical when you talk about long-term chronic diseases. Brandon, I'm sure you're very familiar with that issue.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar with diseases like neurodevelopmental diseases like schizophrenia. I know many friends who didn't want to have their son or daughter diagnosed with schizophrenia because even though that was what they probably had, because the stigma involved and how it might affect their future lives. When you described your husband and how he was such an amazing scientist, working at the NIH, and so active and so functioning at such a high level in his life, it must have been really hard for him to see from within, to witness his own capabilities changing like that. I mean, did you talk about that with him, and how was that from his perspective?
Do you know, for such a smart man, he was in denial all the way in. And that made it even harder to try to support him. I will never forget Ronald Reagan's funeral. And my husband, who was already having issues, seated next to me and saying, that must be terrible for the family. Having no sense about the fact that he was in the process. And you also find that people hide out in the diagnosis. You have to really pay attention. There's also a higher prevalence of less memory impairment, more aggressive behaviors that come out. So it's it's challenging in that early onset, and you want to protect. I wanted to protect my husband's career, quite frankly. If it was something else, I needed to know it. I did not want to give him what Alzheimer's was classically viewed as a death sentence, but a very long, drawn-out one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that was the reality, and I understand how hard that can be to accept something like that. I didn't want to accept that I had schizophrenia for such a long time. I thought I could just overcome it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a link in the brain processes in the development of schizophrenia with the development of Alzheimer's disease through the brain's immune system, the microglia that can cause the reduction of synaptic structures in the brain that scientists such as Beth Stevens are studying. And but that's a topic for another day. But that might contribute to the additional risk of people with schizophrenia face of developing Alzheimer's. But going back to you, Kaitlin, you were talking about environmental interventions for to slow the development of age-related cognitive decline. Can you please go over some of those? Are there lifestyle behaviors or things that people can do to improve their brain health as they age?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was mentioning, up to 30%, and now the new estimates are sort of up to 40% of dementia cases can be attributable to these modifiable risk factors, which suggests that at least a proportion of these dementia cases could be preventable. So these are things like low education, hypertension, hearing impairment, cardiovascular disease, so things that are bad for our heart are bad for our brain, so things like smoking, obesity, diabetes, depression, and then also physical activity and social and cognitive activities, so the leisure activities that we engage in. All of these have been identified as potential points of intervention that relate pretty consistently in these large-scale epidemiologic studies with better brain health outcomes. My work is especially focused on physical activity and cognitive activity, so the types of leisure behaviors that we engage in. There have been some really nice work showing, a recent paper showing, over 80% reduced risk of developing dementia in people who have higher midlife fitness and physical activity. And even in those who went on to develop dementia, the onset of the symptoms was 5 years delayed if you had a higher fitness level at midlife. So this idea that there could be these really protective periods where we can engage and really shape our brains to be protected against age. And there's also been, so those are these epidemiologic studies and observational studies relating these types of protective behaviors to better brain health with age. And more recently, there have been some clinical trials. So testing if we change a certain type of lifestyle behavior, do we see a corresponding improvement in cognition? And that's sort of the gold standard in order to know, is X causing Y? And so one of these trials is called the FINGER trial. It was a multi-site, really large study that did a multimodal lifestyle intervention in older adults who were at risk for dementia. So what they did was they tackled their diet and their exercise, their vascular risk factors. Again, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And they found a significant cognitive improvements over a 2-year period. So I think these are really exciting findings to show that we actually can shape our brain health trajectories. And now there are many studies going on to replicate that original FINGER trial, including the POINTER trial now in the United States. So we'll see where these studies go. And I think my work really focuses on, in animals, we've been able to manipulate behaviors and study their brain for a very long time. And so we sort of understand some of the biology in animals of how if we enrich an animal's environment, you see new neurons and you see new neural connections. And so my work is really trying to take all those animal models of biology, of enrichment, and translate them into humans. So like, what is that biology? How is it that exercise promotes new neurons? And does that happen in humans? There's some hints at it, but what are these pathways? if we could put them into a pill, again, like this could be the treatment. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but it's a really exciting time in the field.
So Brandon, may I just add the advocate perspective? You know, when you cite 12 modifiable risk factors for dementia, many of them are social determinants of health. And that may account for the racial disparities related to Alzheimer's and dementia, where you see a higher profile in African American populations. I think it's 1.5 times higher than the Caucasian population. Also true among the Hispanic population. So that makes it difficult. It also, with all those independent risk factors, you understand why it's been taking so many years, that there probably won't be one cure. There'll probably be a combination therapy. But again, this is new information. And one thing I'm very concerned about is our grandparents who got Alzheimer's. It wasn't because they were ignoring behavior modification that might have changed the trajectory of the disease. Alzheimer's is a disease, and we can't forget that. So I want everyone to understand that you have to be careful. My husband maintained his brain and it just didn't matter. So I think we just have to be sensitive to what the older generation, a very proud generation, went through. And these are the stories coming out of the nursing homes now with COVID. Not access to loved ones, a husband of 94 moving into a facility because his wife had taken care of him for 70 years, and he wanted to be with her and take care of her because of Alzheimer's. So it's very touching, a very proud generation.
That's a great point, Meryl. Thank you so much for bringing up this idea of the social inequity and the disproportionate representation of people of color who are at risk for dementia. And I think you're absolutely, hit the nail on the head that it's these, quality of educational experiences in early life, environmental neighborhood risk factors in midlife and even late life that could really be causing these disparities that we're seeing in communities of color. And I would also completely agree with your comment that these lifestyle behaviors, while we can, say that maybe they relate to better brain outcomes and could prevent, 30 to 40% of dementia cases, that still leaves, over 70% of folks that, like you're describing your husband, who had all these really protective factors in his life, but still developed the disease. So, and those people were still trying to figure out what's going on and what caused the disease itself.
I used to say that when they'd say, well, what were the symptoms? And in the early stages, I said that they were the garden variety grounds for divorce. It was just the behavior changes that were so disconcerting.
Wow. That must have been hard to understand and to adapt to at first, especially. And Meryl, before the show, we were talking about your work, again, as chair of Global Alliance on Women's Brain Health, talking about disparities in the incidence rate of Alzheimer's and dementia in different populations. You mentioned then that it's more prevalent in women than in men. To what do you attribute that, and are there ways that the Global Alliance is working to implement or promote to kind of shift that disparity or help that disparity?
It's a great question, Brandon. What we're finding out is that there are real sex-based differences. Women are twice as likely as men to get Alzheimer's, and they're 2/3 the caregivers. So even as patients, you could say, oh, well, women outlive men. Well, we're now finding, if you begin to tease out the sex-based differences, that there are distinctive differences, that if the disease is on the maternal side, your risk profile is higher, that women are very good with verbal memory so that they pass these tests that are supposed to pick up the disease, and that is another issue. So their diagnosis is delayed, but then they progress faster into the disease than men. But all of this, and I'll defer to Kaitlin, that's very new information, but it's the point of impact. I left my career at 48 years of age. The average age of the caregiver is 49 in this country. And there's no plan B if something happens to us, because 75% of long-term care is a family member caring for a loved one with the disease. So any long-term chronic disease, there are lots of issues surrounding it.
Wow.
I can add to your comments around women's risk of Alzheimer's disease, and this is a new growing area of research, so important. 2 out of every 3 patients with Alzheimer's disease are women. We don't really understand why this is, but women seem to decline a little bit more quickly when they have some of these Alzheimer's risk factors. So having that ApoE genetic risk, women seem to be more vulnerable to it than men, or having some of the protein markers of amyloid plaques, they seem to decline more quickly once they have them than men. We don't understand it. This is an area I'm very interested in, because women are actually quite resilient in many other ways. They survive longer than men, and they have better verbal memory than men on our test, just as you mentioned, and trying to figure out the paradox of all of that. And just to add to your comment about caregivers as well, this is a huge group of folks that we need to be supporting as our population ages. And we have data to show that caregiver health can predict the patient's health and the rapidity of how quickly a patient might decline or do quality of life over time. And so making sure that we're taking care of our caregivers is really critical for both the caregiver and the patient.
Yes, I think that gets missed. The caregiver becomes the invisible patient over time, because in a patient-centric health system, it's only the patient that matters. But if you really look at what families do, Brandon, whether it's mental health, whatever long-term issues there are, this is really a family issue, and we surround a loved one. And you get missed. And we can't afford to miss the what's happening to the caregiver, because there are also statistics that show that caregivers are 6 times more likely to get Alzheimer's or dementia themselves, just from the intensity of care, the hypervigilance, everything that you see in post-traumatic stress becomes an issue, or severe stress for caregivers. And we just, we're all going through COVID right now together, and we're feeling what it feels like to be isolated. Well, that's the way those of us in the Alzheimer's space, we've been living this way for most of the disease. So it's not new to us, unfortunately, and it is the resilience, Kaitlin, that you study that to me is the key. How do you maintain resilience in the unknown?
Well, Meryl, you clearly are an extraordinarily resilient woman to have cared for your husband and your mother for such a long time, and to be such an amazing advocate today, so strong and outspoken and doing such great work. Thanks for all the great work that you do.
Thank you for the great work you do, and Kaitlin, we're in this together.
We are in this together, absolutely. So viewers, we're talking today with Dr. Kaitlin Casaletto, neuropsychologist at University of California, San Francisco, as well as Meryl Comer, who is the co-founder of Us Against Alzheimer's and the chair of the Global Alliance on Women's Brain Health, as well as an author of Slow Dancing with a Stranger, which is about her husband, caring for her husband who dealt with Alzheimer's disease. Don't forget to post questions for our guests. We look forward to your questions and also any comments you might have about your own experiences, either in yourself or in a family member, someone you love who deals with dementia or Alzheimer's. Also, if you know anyone who can benefit from the information provided in this webcast, please share it with them. So, Meryl, you said there's a convergence, and we've just been talking about this, driven by the pandemic, between Alzheimer's and dementia and mental health. And there's a recognition that health systems will have to respond in new, innovative ways to this crisis, as will employers. In what ways are you hopeful for change?
I see the convergence, Brandon, because of the time. I mean, it's not unlike when your family started One Mind for research, the convergence of issues, the fact that depression is high. Some of the latest studies that are coming out show that an older generation is more resilient than the millennials or Gen Xers, that more are faced with depression. So all of a sudden, these mental health issues have now become front and center during this time. And that to me is the convergence. The other opportunity is as you move closer to early diagnostics and lifestyle interventions, non-pharmacologic interventions, all of a sudden the head gets connected with the heart. I mean, the body gets reconnected. I can only imagine it was budgetary considerations that kept all the disease advocates separated for so many years. But now we have to connect it all. And I think that will make a difference. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. I'll take that. We need to stay well, not unlike the HIV/AIDS group. They fought to stay well until the science caught up. And I think we're in that mode right now, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity. You know, no disease wants the other disease's baggage. And we all have baggage. And I do think that it's because so many of us will be impacted, and it's related to the brain and one mind, that you're going to see us really blow through stigma. We need to blow through the stigma.
That will help get more attention to the issues, and more people talking about it will ultimately lead to more support for the research that will help develop better ways to address these health conditions. That's amazing. Thank you so much for going over that, Meryl. And then building on what Meryl said, Kaitlin, you know, what gives you the most hope for development of better treatments and ways to address Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I think I'm incredibly fortunate to work at the Memory and Aging Center at UCSF, where I tackle these problems alongside, I think, the most empathic and brilliant scientists in the field. So I get to see firsthand where the field is going, and it's exciting. Just in the past month or so, there have been these massive advancements in sort of more universal ways to detect the Alzheimer's biomarkers in blood, for example, a lot more accessible than the traditional ways that we've been approaching. And, you know, the first Alzheimer's disease modifying therapy is right now under expedited review at the FDA. This will be the first ever Alzheimer's disease modifying therapy that's, you know, potentially coming online. And there's a lot of kinks to work out with both of those, the biomarkers and the treatment that I just mentioned. But I think this speaks to the broader advancements in the field. I think the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see, you know, just rapid gains. The technology is there. As Meryl was describing, I think the push, the urgency is really there. Our population is aging, and we need to treat them and care for them. And I think we're really poised to do so. So I'm optimistic. I'm excited to see where I'm going. I think as a scientist, you have to be optimistic, but I think there's certainly cause to be so right now.
That's phenomenal. Thanks, Kaitlin, for your work. And I'm sure it's buoyed, as you mentioned before, by the efforts of advocates like Meryl. So thanks to you as well, Meryl, for your amazing work.
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you both being on Brainwaves today. Viewers, thank you too. You can post follow-up questions on onemind.org/brainwaves. For a list of resources and to find out more about Alzheimer's and dementia, please visit usagainstalzheimers.org. Thanks so much and take care.
Most of the time, I just want to lay in bed. I don't want to talk to people.
Mental illness is the world's leading cause of disability. And right now, our mental health is being put to the test. Who is leading the discoveries to provide quality mental health care from the lab to the front lines? We are One Mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.